Hello and welcome to this month's DSpaceDirect information session. My name is Carissa Smith and I am the product manager for DSpaceDirect and DuraCloud, which are two fully hosted and managed services from the DuraSpace not-for-profit organization. To find out more about DSpaceDirect, DuraCloud, or DuraSpace, please visit their respective websites at dspacedirect.org, duracloud.org, and duraspace.org. Please note that your audio for today's call is disabled, as you probably already observed, but please feel free to submit questions or comments through the chat feature located in the bottom left of your screen. Simply type in the text box and click the conversation bubble to send. I will certainly leave enough time at the end to address any questions that come in through the chat, and I'll also try to monitor it as I'm presenting and doing the demo today as well. My sessions are typically pretty informal and as interactive as I can make them without having the participants having audio capability. So please feel free to use that chat feature as much as you'd like if you have any questions or comments as I'm speaking today. I have about 30 minutes. I'm going to do a quick presentation, and then I will do, again, another quick demo and make sure I leave enough time at the end for questions. And of course, I'm happy to stay on the line as long as needed to ensure that all the questions get answered. So with that, let me transition my slide here. If I can get my computer not to freeze. One moment, bear with me here. Okay, that's not the session I wanted. Okay, so to start things off, I thought I just would describe the DuraSpace organization first. So DuraSpace is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that provides leadership and innovation for open technologies, open source technologies that promote durable, persistent access to digital data. And the real mission of the DuraSpace organization is expressed by our byline, committed to our digital future. So I always like to start with a description of what DuraSpace, the organization, is, because DSpaceDirect is a service from the DuraSpace organization, which is mission-driven, not-for-profit, and really seeking, trying to solve the problems and the expressed needs of the academic, university, library, archive, and cultural heritage community. So DuraSpace has two separate sides of the not-for-profit organization. On the open source technology project side, of course, there is the DSpace open source software project, the Fedora open source software project, and new to the DuraSpace open source project umbrella is the Vivo project. And the DuraSpace organization really serves as a steward for those open source projects, providing infrastructure, technical direction for those open source projects, so that they don't stagnate, so that there's a community developed and really created around those open source projects. On the other side of the DuraSpace organization is the hosted and managed services side, which is where I work, and that's where the DSpaceDirect hosted service and the DuraCloud hosted service come into play. And of course, I'll be speaking all day today about DSpaceDirect. So with that, let's launch into actually more details about the DSpaceDirect hosted service. This is a relatively new service from the DuraSpace organization. We launched it to the public in March of this year. So we have been going for about 7 to 8 months now from a public hosted service. The kind of high-level features of DSpaceDirect is that it allows you to very quickly start up an institutional or other type of repository in a hosted environment. As a customer of DSpaceDirect, you don't need any technical infrastructure, any hardware. All you need is essentially a computer with an internet connection and the ability to use a web browser. And you can get your repository up and running that quickly. You also don't need a lot of technical staff in-house to use DSpaceDirect. We're really trying to create a service that allows librarians, archivists, and other users to be able to add content to their repository and get started. So you don't have to know anything about Apache web server, anything about Java code, certainly no system administration at all. That's all handled as part of the subscription hosted service by DuraSpace staff. Of course, because it's a hosted service, you have a whole menu of you pick features and functionality that you can include in your subscription and also in your hosted DSpaceDirect account. I think one of the greatest benefits of DSpaceDirect is that the subscription includes no cost upgrades of the actual software that DSpaceDirect is running. So you get the latest and greatest features as a customer, and that's just included in your annual subscription. Another thing that's included in your annual subscription to DSpaceDirect is automatic content preservation. So DSpaceDirect not only stores your Access content in your DSpaceDirect repository, of course, it also creates a replica copy of that content and stores it in a different technical environment, which allows you as a customer to check the box on some of the preservation best practices and recommendations regarding replica copies stored in separate technical administrations in different geographic areas. DSpaceDirect handles all of that for you in the back end of the service. Of course, because it's web-based, you have access to your content at any time, assuming you have an internet connection and a browser, as I mentioned. And again, I think one of the differentiating factors of DSpaceDirect from other hosted services that other vendors provide is that you own your data. DuraSpace is not for profit. You are using open source software with DSpaceDirect. There is no proprietary software running there. You don't have to format your content in any way before you add it to your DSpaceDirect repository, and you can download it at any point in time. So you are in complete control of your data at any point in time, and you are leveraging open source software as well. So we're not running, and you're not locked into any proprietary software or licenses or data formats. And because DSpaceDirect is open source software, it's running the latest and greatest DSpace open source software release. We encourage all of our DSpaceDirect customers to join the global user community of DSpace users. There are over 1,500 institutions worldwide who are using the open source locally installed DSpace. And a lot of them are grappling with the same questions that, of course, DSpaceDirect customers use. We're all using the same technology. So a lot of the very high-level questions of how do I archive and provide open access for a certain type of content, or how do you deal with restrictions? What are the policies around embargo? Very high-level repository topics are discussed on the global user community list. So we encourage our DSpaceDirect customers to join that. Delving into a few more details about DSpaceDirect, and I am going through this quite briskly, as I want to be sure that I have enough time for demo and also for questions. So please feel free to insert questions in the chat if I'm speaking too quickly or you want more information. DSpaceDirect, as I mentioned, is open source hosted software, and DSpaceDirect is actually running the latest and greatest release of the DSpace open source software project's software release. So there's no difference between the open source DSpace project and the software that it generates and DSpaceDirect in terms of the actual software, the code that's running, etc. The major difference is that DuraSpace is hosting the DSpace software, and we call it DSpaceDirect, and customers subscribe. So really the difference between DSpace and DSpaceDirect is all of the installation, the maintenance, the hardware and server setup and system administration is all handled by the DuraSpace staff in a true hosted service type environment. And I think that probably explains bullet number 2. I've mentioned annual upgrades are included, of course, in your standard subscription to DSpaceDirect. There's automatic content backups to DuraCloud. That's the preservation piece that I was talking about. Another great feature of DSpaceDirect is that every single content item that you upload into your DSpaceDirect account is assigned a unique and persistent identifier, a URI that we leverage the CI handle system. So it's a handle ID that's assigned to every single content item, which is great for multiple reasons. First of all, it doesn't tie you to your DSpaceDirect instance whatsoever. You can then hand off these handle URIs to other colleagues or users to find and locate your content without it being tied to a dspacedirect.org URL. But it also allows you to migrate out of DSpaceDirect at any point in the future and still have all of your content available at those URIs. We would migrate along that handle registration to you, the customer, if you decided to ever walk away from DSpaceDirect. So that's great peace of mind, but ultimately it means that all of your content will always be accessible at those persistent IDs, regardless of whether you're using DSpaceDirect or you decide 5 years from now to go to a local Fedora install. You can take that handle system with you, and your users will still be able to find their content. Of course, DSpace and DSpaceDirect have been optimized for search engine capabilities in terms of having the content that's stored in DSpaceDirect pop up in Google Scholar, Google, and Bing, and Yahoo, all the major search engines. There has been extra work done to ensure that DSpace and DSpaceDirect content appears in Google Scholar, though. I will say that there's been quite a bit of work done around that. And that, again, comes automatically out of the box. You have some basic site branding that you can request in your DSpaceDirect account, such as adding your logo, your color scheme, some branded text, etc. Of course, you can add as many users or give access to as many users as you'd like. There isn't a limit to the number of users like you might expect with some hosted services. You can add as many as you like. You could create groups. You can assign permissions to those users and groups. And that's all available to you through the administrative console, you, the customer. It's very easy to configure, and it's also always available to you. And of course, there's basic usage statistics and reportings in the interface in terms of the most popular content item, the most popular collection of information, when it was accessed, where it was accessed from, how many times it's been downloaded in the past month, etc. Oops, I'm sliding too quickly here. A few more standard features of the subscription offering. You can optionally include to integrate Google Analytics with your account, so you have even more statistics to review. You get automatic customer support included in your subscription. You can upgrade in terms of the amount of storage at any point in time. There's other customizable options in terms of who approves content that's being submitted into your repository. The license that is assigned to submissions is entirely customizable by you, the customer. And I think I've touched upon all the rest of this in the slide. So I keep mentioning annual subscriptions. So I did want to make a slide and spend just a little time in talking about how a customer pays for DSpaceDirect. Right now, the subscription plans are segmented by the amount of content you would need to store in your DSpaceDirect account. The smallest plan includes storage for up to 75 gigabytes, and that's $3,750 a year. It goes up to the large plan, 250 gigabytes, which is $8,250 a year. All of these plans include all of the features and functionality that I've already spoken about. You can add as much content as you wish into your DSpaceDirect plan. If you have more than 250 gigabytes, please contact me and I'll generate a custom quote. Essentially, because it is a hosted service and it's cloud-based, the more content you store, the cheaper it is per gigabyte, is how that mathematically works out. Okay, so enough talking to slides. Let me quickly jump into a demo here so you know exactly what a DSpaceDirect account looks like. All right, assuming my screen is coming through, here is a sample DSpaceDirect repository. There has been no styling done to this. You can see that it's kind of out of the box. So you as a customer would have the ability to add your logo, add your color scheme. You can change where this main navigation column goes on the left or the right, etc. But I'm quickly going to touch upon some of the highlights of DSpaceDirect. So the main part of your screen here, let me highlight it, is kind of the meat and potatoes of a DSpace repository. The first couple paragraphs is on the main page is a description of your repository that you can customize. So it can include information about your institution, about the type of content that you're storing in your repository, if it is if it's tied to a particular group within your organization, or perhaps a special collection. You have a repository just for that. You can describe it here. You can include links to whatever other institutional references you'd like. It's really truly customizable. Below that, you'll always see two other options, or two things available. You'll always see a list of communities within your repository, and then below that you'll see content that was most recently added to the repository. So kind of a quick cheat sheet for your users to view what was added most recently within your repository. But I wanted to go back and just touch really quickly on the term community. For those of you who aren't familiar with DSpace and how it stores content, DSpace is a hierarchical repository, and it stores content in the following way. At the very top level is the concept of a community. Typically, it is a community of users it's tied to, such as like the Department of Mathematics or the Department of Physics or the library. Within a community, there is the concept of a collection. And then within a collection, there are items. So that is the basic structure of DSpace and DSpaceDirect. You have the ability to add as many communities, as many collections as you'd like, but a content item always lives inside of a collection, which lives inside of a community. And that's how you navigate your DSpaceDirect repository as well. You kind of drill down to find your content. Of course, there is integrated search. Up here in the top right, you'll see the search box. You can type, let's type my dog's name because I know I have a lot of content about my dog. So you do have the ability to search content within your repository, and it will pull it up in the search results page. You can add additional filters. It is a pretty specific search. You can also browse by different facets, such as you can look at different communities and collections. You could browse by authors if you're looking for particular authors in your repository or subjects, etc. Below that, you'll see the My Account box, and that allows you to log into your repository. This is where administrators would log in, get into the back end of your repository and make some changes. You can also invite your users or individuals at your institution to register for an account within the repository, and then you can go about giving them additional permissions. So there's a registration process, essentially a way for new users to create a profile and a username that you can then give permission to content. And then below that, you'll see the Discover box. And again, this breaks out in terms of a couple facets and allows for your users to quickly navigate around your repository and find the content that they're looking for. So the Discover box breaks out authors, subjects, and dates issued for content that's stored in your repository. And then below that, you'll see the RSS feeds. So you can subscribe to activity that is happening within this repository, either RSS 1.0, 2.0, or an Atom RSS feed. So delving down in here, I'm going to click really quickly on my sample community, and this will lead you to the community landing page. Every single community has its own landing page, and again, you can customize this how you'd like. For instance, I added an image of my dog. I added some descriptive text. I added in some news about this community, and I added a copyright statement. Not really, but I could have added one if I wanted to. And then you can see one of the important pieces here is that there are 2 collections within this Carissa sample community. There's pictures of my dog Zeta, and there is a puppy collection. I love dogs if you haven't already gleaned that. And then below that, you'll see recent submissions to this community only. So it excludes any other submissions that have been made in the repository to other communities, and it only lists things that have been added to this Carissa sample community lately. One thing I'll note is that this navigation column persists on every single page, which is a really great user interface capability. Your users become familiar with it. They can always browse and search and kind of move about the repository by going to the main navigation column here on the right-hand side of this repository. And again, they can browse, they can discover, and they can sign up for RSS feeds. But I wanted to point out that these boxes are context aware. So you can see, for instance, this Discover box now is much shorter than it was on the main repository homepage. And that's because it is only listing authors, subjects, and dates for content that is stored in this Carissa community. So it's really allowing the user to kind of drill down into the repository and hopefully find the content that they're looking for. So if they know their content is in the Carissa community, but maybe they don't know the author, if they click on Carissa community, then the list of authors just in this community is listed for them. So then they can more easily drill down and select the content that they're looking for. And again, the same is true for the browse box too. You can browse just within this community by the same facets as on the main page. If you click on a collection, and I know I'm getting close on time and I want to make sure I have enough time at the end for questions. If you click on a collection, the collection homepage is structured almost entirely the same as a community. You have the same ability to add a logo, add custom descriptive text about the collection, news, copyright, etc., etc. The navigation again is still here on the right-hand side. Again, it is context aware, so now you can see the Discover box is even shorter. As surprise, surprise, I am the only author within this particular collection that is devoted to my dog. You can see that the subjects that are available is much smaller as well. And then, of course, you can see recent submissions to this collection only within this main screen. And then the last thing that I wanted to show during my demo is the actual content item page itself. So DSpaceDirect stores content and the content metadata in Dublin Core, if anybody on the line is interested in metadata. I only filled out the very minimum amount of metadata when I submitted this content item to the repository. There are close to 50, I think, metadata fields that you can capture. There are only, I think, 7 that are required, such as author, title, and there's a few other ones that are required. Date, I think, is the other one that is required. You can see when I clicked on the Show Full Item Record, you get the Dublin Core metadata presented to you, and you can see some of the information that I filled in about this item. You can also see the individual bit streams that I attached to this content item. One of the great features of DSpaceDirect is that you can add as many bit streams, meaning individual files, to a content item as you'd like. So this, the name of this item is Zeta Sleeping, and I uploaded a photo, a JPEG image of my dog sleeping. But I could have uploaded an audio file of her sleeping and snoring. I could have written a little story in a Word document or a PDF and uploaded that. And they could have all appeared here in the files area for my Zeta Sleeping content item. And you can also see down at the bottom that it reminds me what collection this content item is stored in. All right, so with that, I know I went through a lot very quickly, so I want to be sure to open up the floor for questions. So please feel free to insert questions through the chat feature, which is for those who joined late on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. And I'm going to transition back to the document that I recently shared. One moment here. So again, that was a lot of information in 25 minutes. So I'm sure if you don't have questions now, you may have some later today, tomorrow, or in the next week. So I would encourage you to reach out to me directly if you have additional questions at csmith@duraspace.org. I have some YouTube videos regarding DSpaceDirect that go into further detail. There's, of course, the DSpaceDirect website, and there's also a demo DSpaceDirect site that I just went to that you can poke around at. So feel free to do any research on those sites. I just got a question, can DSpace be called a content management system? It's not really a content management system in the true sense of content management. It is an institutional repository, so it's really, a lot of the features and functionality are have been specifically developed for university libraries, archives, and other organizations that have documents that they not only need to store, but they need to provide access to their patrons. And I'm talking like digitized documents. The initial use case for DSpaceDirect was for electronic theses and dissertations, so PDF, Word documents, data sets, etc. So the way that they're stored in the community collection and content item level, as well as the metadata that's captured, is I think more around institutional repository use case, not directly content management. That's not to say you couldn't use DSpace as a content management system, but you just might be missing some of the functionality that you might expect from a CMS. So Andy is asking, what can be done extra in DSpace which can't be done in Joomla? I'm not that really familiar with all of Joomla's features. Joomla is much more of a web content management system. I know I've used it in the past for actual web pages, image displays, image gallery. It's really geared more towards web content. And DSpace is geared more towards adding documents, adding metadata around those documents, providing more kind of library catalog search capabilities. Websites are typically, I think, maybe not quite as sophisticated from a library perspective, and certainly there's no metadata captured when you're creating a Joomla page, for instance. So a little bit of apples to oranges comparison. DSpace and DSpaceDirect are not content management systems. Other questions that I can answer for folks? And I see a couple folks typing. And again, if you come up with questions later on, please feel free to reach out to me directly or submit a question through the DSpaceDirect.org website, and someone will get back to you. Is DSpace ready for a large volume of documents? It is capable of storing hundreds of thousands of documents. I think one of the largest DSpace repositories had over 300,000 documents. So they can get quite large, though many institutions don't even have anywhere near that amount of content to store in a repository. other questions that I can answer for folks? And it is 1 o'clock Eastern time. I've been going for a half an hour, and I try to keep these as close to half an hour as possible. So if folks need to sign off, I completely understand, but I will stay on the line while folks are typing questions and make sure I get everything answered for folks. Great question, Hannah. Can I give you the name of a couple of institutions that currently use DSpaceDirect that you can look at? Absolutely. On the DSpaceDirect.org website, we have profiles. In particular, we have the American Library Association is storing all of their archived content in DSpaceDirect, so you can read their profile and go off to their website. Bennington College in Vermont is storing their library and archive content in DSpaceDirect. And again, we have their profile on our website, and you can link off to their actual DSpaceDirect repository. The National Children's Advocacy Center's library, online library, is also available in DSpaceDirect. Again, and those are all profiled on DSpaceDirect.org. And we have a handful of other ones that we're still in the process of writing profiles for. But if you need any other examples, or you would like an example that's closer to your institutional needs, size, etc., just reach out to me and I can match you up with someone. Yes, DSpaceDirect does allow you to store media files, Andy, MP3s, MP4s. It doesn't really. You can store any file format. It does not provide any media streaming capabilities at this point. So there's no media viewer. It just gives you a link to the file that you uploaded that your users could download. It is on the roadmap to integrate a media player of some variety, but we're just not quite there yet. Yep, it does support some controlled vocabulary, Roberto. If you have a particular controlled vocabulary that you want individuals who are submitting content into your repository to follow, we have what's called an add-on package with DSpaceDirect so that you can kind of customize that controlled vocabulary so that your people who are submitting content to your repository only have that as an option. So that is something that we can provide. It's not available out of the box, but it is a customizable add-on package feature. And then Andy noted Maven and Ant are building project management for Java. Then I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Andy, and it's actually beyond my technical knowledge of DSpace and being able to compare other projects. So that might be something that you want to follow up on the DSpace mailing list. There are a lot of developers on that that could give you some input and insight. All right, well, thank you everyone for the questions. I hope this was helpful, and as I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me by email or submit the DSpaceDirect forms on the website, and someone will get back to you if you have additional questions. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. I really appreciate the great questions. So take care.